Curb Your Enthusiasm is a sitcom unlike any other, with its own unique sense of scale and a distinct feeling of authorship. Created by and starring Larry David, it follows a fictionalized version of David's real life, navigating the world of social norms and unwritten rules of etiquette through the eyes of a man who needed a good reason to follow the niceties we take for granted. Larry David's career in entertainment began decades before as a stand-up in New York City. He would go on to work on the TV show Fridays and then write for Saturday Night Live. In 1989, he co-created the sitcom Seinfeld with Jerry Seinfeld, and its success effectively cemented him as one of the major figures in American comedy. After writing the finale of Seinfeld, Larry David began contemplating a return to stand-up.
I was at Castle Rock. Jeff Garlin was working on a pilot, and I would see Jeff from time to time, and he one day said to me, what are you doing? And I said, I think I'm going to go back and do some stand-up. And he said to me, well, you should film it. I said, get out of here. That's a terrible idea.
David eventually reconsidered and decided to pursue the idea, only he thought his real life wouldn't be interesting to watch on a special.
Nobody wants to see me walking around shopping or going to pick up my dry cleaning. What am I going to do when I'm not on stage? It just seemed really boring to me. So I thought, I have to make up something.
To make the special feel more natural, instead of writing dialogue, it was decided that actors would improvise their lines. Jeff Garlin originally wanted to direct this special, but Larry David saw him playing his manager, Jeff Green. David instead tapped Robert Whitey to direct, feeling he'd be a better fit to make the show feel more like a documentary.
I made actual comedy documentaries. He thought maybe I could make a fake one look pretty real. So I just said, yeah, of course I'm interested.
When the special was pitched to HBO, it was an easy sell. Chris Albrecht, who greenlit the show, said,
We all thought Larry was hysterically funny. By that time, he was certainly a grown-up. He'd been an executive producer of a show, creator of, one of the top comedies of all time. So this was not a tough decision. It was an easy yes.
Curb Your Enthusiasm has always had a very small principal cast, instead populating most of its world with regular characters who would come and go as the series went along. Larry David playing a fictionalized version of himself was one of the few constants. One of the others was Jeff Garlin, who played Jeff Green, Larry's manager and constant companion, appearing alongside him in nearly every episode. A stand-up comedian and actor, prior to the Curb special, Garlin had a recurring role on Mad About You, and he appeared in several other TV and film projects. Garlin and David had a very natural chemistry.
You cannot anticipate that we would have the chemistry that we've had. But then when we started really doing it and we were filming, we're like, it feels like we've been working together for like 30 years.
Jeff is Larry's stalwart companion throughout the series, constantly joining him in schemes and plots as they try to navigate social situations and personal conflicts, often in ways that try to save face while ultimately being self-serving.
I'm going to bring us over by your house later.
What are we going to do?
Bring it by your house. I told her you wouldn't mind me having some.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Did you know that you stole my leftovers?
Yes, I did.
You did.
The other person cast for the special who would be a major part of the eventual series was Cheryl Hines as Larry's wife, Cheryl David. A relative unknown at the time, Hines was a member of the improv group The Groundlings. Until they saw Hines, there was some trouble in casting Larry's wife. The casting director at the time, Marla Garlin, Jeff Garlin's former spouse, explained in an interview, Larry was looking for someone who was a great foil, not someone that would beat him down. It also had to be someone that would handle their own with Larry, not someone he can steamroll over, because he's so clever and smart. That's when Cheryl Hines came in.
She was so perfect, knew exactly what to say, how to make the scene better, how to handle me, didn't yell, wasn't strident or anything, just captured the perfect tone that I wanted.
Cheryl's role on the show was to act almost like a stand-in for the audience, often requiring Larry to explain his antics to her and serve as a reminder of what was happening in the episode. But she also served an additional function on top of that.
And I think people watch the show and they go, well, if she can love him, then there must be something lovable about him.
Cheryl is perpetually bemused by the antics of her husband. Patient and understanding, she sees some amount of charm and kindness in Larry, though it's often hard to find under his prickly exterior.
And congratulations on this and your marriage and all this wonderful stuff.
I had almost forgotten about that.
One other early component that fell into place for the series was its title, Curb Your Enthusiasm. Larry David explained it saying, I heard the expression and it jumped out and stayed with me. Maybe not everyone's as happy as you are, and you shouldn't go around shoving it in everybody's faces. I actually find it more disconcerting than a public display of affection. There's something funny about it, too. Happiness is upsetting. Other people's good fortune is upsetting. Director Robert Whitey reflected on the title, saying, At the screening, we passed out a little questionnaire with the presumptive titles and asked people to check their favorites. One idea got a few votes, another got some more, and Curb Your Enthusiasm got no votes. None. That's when Larry said, "Too bad, I like that one. Curb Your Enthusiasm, that's what we're going to call it." That attitude would shape Curb Your Enthusiasm for the rest of its run. Originally airing on October 17th, 1999, the Curb Your Enthusiasm special has a strange feeling to it if, like most people, you're watching it after having seen some amount of the series. There are some major differences that become immediately apparent, such as the very clear framing as a documentary.
Piece of gum?
No,
Why not?
I don't like gum.
What's not to like?
I don't know. I've never been a big gum guy.
See, this is good stuff, huh? Yeah, that's real good. Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad it's getting all this. Yeah. Did you get that gum story we just did? Because that was really good.
There are also interviews with talking heads, an idea from director Robert Whitey to give it a more documentary feel.
He was a phenomenon. He just couldn't get over the hump that comedians have to perform in front of other people.
There were differences in character relationships as well, such as the tension between Jeff and Cheryl that wasn't present in the series.
Some people just rub you the wrong way. Yeah. And that's how I feel about Jeff.
According to Jeff Garlin, this bit of conflict was the only note from HBO that impacted the special.
That was the one note we got. She wanted more of us.
Conflict.
Yeah, conflict between Cheryl and I. And Larry said, "No, it won't work." And he was right.
And he was right.
From here, HBO would have a much lighter touch, leaving the creative decisions to Larry David. The special is also very noticeably low budget. It was shot for somewhere between $400,000 and $500,000, a very low figure for 1 hour of television, particularly if it's on HBO. You can get a sense of budget constraints when you see radical changes in the quality of the footage as it was filmed with 2 different cameras. For a special that was about Larry's return to stand-up, there were only a few brief stand-up segments.
I think I'm going to do very well tonight. I really do. I'm feeling just unbelievably confident. Well, that was a bad start. It was a bad start. A really stupid start. I don't know why I did that.
The special was not quite what HBO was expecting. Chris Albrecht explains.
When he handed us the cut, it was a lot of everything else and very little stand-up.
While ratings were not particularly strong for the special, the reaction to the pilot from critics was very positive. Variety's Phil Gallo wrote, "No matter how Larry David Curb Your Enthusiasm is interpreted, an indictment of the people within the entertainment industry or a linear delusion of one of comedy's funniest thinkers, it is the work of genius." Although the special exists thanks to a meeting of minds between Larry David and Jeff Garlin, the person or persons who suggested they turn this special into a series is a bit tougher to suss out. Gavin Pallone, Larry's manager at the time, in an interview said, "As the show developed, it became clear to me and to Larry's agent, Ari Emanuel, that this could be a series. Larry didn't have that in his mind, but he was not closed off to the idea. Ari and I told Chris Albrecht and Carolyn Strauss at HBO that they should do it as a series." Chris Albrecht has said that he and Carolyn Strauss came to this conclusion on their own.
I don't know if Carolyn said it or I said it or somebody said, maybe there's a series in this.
Larry David also considered that this could be a series as well.
Halfway through the filming of it, I started to think, well, this could be a series. And when we showed it to Chris Albrecht, he thought it could be a series as well.
All these stories are a bit vague in their timing, though the earliest one seems to be told by Jeff Garlin, which took place while casting the special.
He said to me in the hallway at HBO where we were filming, he goes, "Wouldn't this be great to film as a series?"
While there's no written record of this to be sure, it could be a case of many people happy to take credit for a successful series. Or it could have been that Curb being a series was so self-evident that everyone had the same idea. This needed to be a show. The move from a special to a series meant that Curb Your Enthusiasm would need to have a dedicated production process, and as the show grew in success, that process changed throughout its 25 years on the air. Larry David described it saying, "From start to finish, it takes around 18 months to make a season. 6 months of writing, 6 months of shooting, and 6 months of editing." Each episode begins with a story created by Larry David. In an interview, he said, "The hard part is story because that's the engine of the show. You could get someone else to play my part and it would still be a good show. There's no mystery to it. What's a mystery is the great idea." A lot of these ideas are taken from David's everyday life, social situations that were awkward or strange things he noticed. Originally, he wrote these in a small notebook, but he would eventually start taking notes using his BlackBerry as the series progressed. These ideas would be turned into story outlines where each scene would be detailed, only rarely including a line or two of dialogue. You can see a comparison in this image from Curb Your Enthusiasm, the book, that details how one of these brief scenarios translates to the dialogue in a scene. Although that seems like an easier way to construct an episode, it didn't necessarily get written any quicker.
It takes me longer to write one of these shows than it does to write a Seinfeld episode that has dialogue in it. And a lot of times when I'd be writing a Seinfeld show, I get to a scene and I go, this is so set up, it doesn't need any nuanced writing or anything. Anybody could write this scene. And sort of that's how I felt the scene writes itself. So the idea was to do a show where the scenes write themselves.
These outlines were used more frequently by the production crew than the actual performers, as Larry David avoided sharing the details of what each episode was about with any of the actors.
I don't want them to prepare for the scene. And if they get an outline, they'll start thinking of funny lines and funny things to say and what they could do. And I want it to be spontaneous.
And then it becomes sitcom writing.
And then it becomes, becomes stale.
The length of these outlines has changed over the years, in part reflecting how episodes were running longer.
For the series, an average outline for a half hour will be about 7 pages, but for the special, the outline was only a page and a half.
Over time, the budget increased dramatically for the series. Some of this is obvious comparing the camera quality in the first season to one of the later seasons. But in addition to better cameras, the series had greater access to building props, set dressing, wardrobe, and all the other elements that most shows start off with. As an example of how things changed, here are 2 quotes from the prop masters of this series talking about Larry's glasses. Here's Dort Clark, who worked on the show's first 9 seasons. The glasses on the show were the real glasses he wore. They were a certain style of Oliver Peoples frames from the 1990s. He only had 2 pairs, one that was transitional and one that was clear. And here's Rose Leaker, who worked on the final 2 seasons. A few seasons before me, a producer went down the rabbit hole in search for the manufacturer of the exact pair of glasses. She was able to find someone in a small cabin in Switzerland to make 4 pairs, which Larry inherited. So every day the prop department was in charge of his personal, irreplaceable glasses. It's hard to imagine a producer having the time or budget to track down and have new glasses specially made for Larry to wear on the show during its first season. But in later seasons, there were more resources for the show to draw on. The amount of filming for each scene of the series seemed to increase as well. A variety of sources would place it at 30 minutes of filming for 1 minute of aired footage on average for its first season, reaching 40 minutes of filming by season 5 for each minute aired, and then eventually 1 hour of filming for 1 minute of used footage by the end of the series. All the footage led to more editing than usual for a sitcom episode, especially since, due to the nature of being unscripted, there were a lot of small edits that needed to be made. Series editor Roger Nygaard said in an interview, "Faster comedy is funnier comedy. Generally, I could take a scene and make it 15% funnier simply by going through and pulling out all the pauses, the ums, the you-knows, the uhs. I'd lean it up and clean it up. When you make it concise and faster, it just gets funnier." The show's theme has become iconic and has been heard in thousands of memes. The piece is titled Frolic, and it's written by Luciano Michelini, originally used in the Italian movie La Bellissima Estate, although it was chosen by Larry David after he heard it from a local bank ad he had seen on television. The music supervisor for the series, Steve Rash, worked on the Curb Enthusiasm special. In an interview, Rash described his work saying, "We don't necessarily score in the traditional sense of supporting the emotion of the scene. It's more transitional or a montage. The tuba sound is primarily in a lot of scenes, and I think it really helps because it's such a silly, clowning sound. It takes the edge off Larry's anger and cues the listener like a laugh track. Like, don't worry, it's just a comedy show." One major component of Curb Your Enthusiasm that was added when it became a series was its next permanent cast member, Jeff's wife Susie, played by Susie Essman. Essman was an easy choice for Larry David to make when casting the role of Jeff's wife, particularly after he had seen her perform at a roast for Jerry Stiller.
Married to such a wonderful woman because she's really incredible. I mean, think about this, Anne. She's had sex with Jerry. She's given birth to Ben. She's the only woman I know who's had both Ben and Jerry inside of her.
Susie, hi, it's LD. I'm doing this show, and I want you to be in it. And I was like, all right, that sounds good. What's the part? Don't worry about the part. You could do it. Don't worry about it. There's nothing you have to worry about. Well, you want to send me a script? There's no script. Just do it. I was like, well, okay.
Although named after her, Susie Green was nothing like Susie Essman. She explained in an interview, "I'm not one of these people who wants to play themselves. I'm with myself 24/7. I wanted to play a fun character and I loved her. The thing about Susie that really resonates, people think that it's her language, but I think it's her comfort with her own anger. She's so completely comfortable and unapologetic in her rage. Susie's rage would become iconic in the series, originally unleashed thanks to some encouragement from Larry David.
She wasn't really hitting it. And I walked over to her and I said, this take, go up and call him a fat fuck.
Susie has two modes of being in the series, rage and thinly concealed rage, and Larry is the perfect man to get her from the latter to the former.
You don't want a tour?
You don't need to walk me
All right, get the fuck out of my house, okay, Larry? Just get the fuck out right now!
Each episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm featured several guest stars. Some of the more memorable guests included Richard Lewis playing himself, Bob Einstein playing Marty Funkhauser, and J.B. Smoove playing Leon Black. The nature of the show made it a unique challenge to cast. Jeff Garland explained in an interview saying, "With stand-ups, 50% can do it and 50% can't. With actors, 25% can do it and 75% can't. When it comes to improvisers, there's a certain few who have the style of the show inherently in them." Auditions often included Larry David so he could see how easily actors could adapt to the unscripted nature of the show. They were frequently instructed to not try to be funny and instead let Larry drive the humor. Gina Gershon, who appeared in 2 episodes of the series, described the experience saying, "You throw out your clay and Larry sculpts it." In later seasons, the show would rely more on self-taped auditions, though this was largely a product of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. In the early seasons of the series, many of the guest stars came from connections in Larry David's personal life. Richard Lewis, for instance, had long been a close friend of his, which is why their scenes together have such a natural chemistry.
Off camera is exactly the way it is on camera. It's nice to have that kind of freedom with a friend, to be able to yell at him and know that it's not going to affect the friendship at all.
Ted Danson ended up on the show as a personal favor. He explains in an interview what it was like after having watched the original special for Curb Your Enthusiasm.
I watched it going, oh, Lord, I don't know about this. Well, he seems like such a nice guy. Let's be supportive and tell him that we'd love to be on it anytime he needs us to play ourselves or whatever. And that'll never happen because the show sucks.
One neat detail of the series, particularly in its earlier seasons, was its tendency to cast actors who would go on to be great successes in the future. We got to see Mindy Kaling before she was on The Office, Ken Jeong before The Hangover, and Eric Andre in one of his first ever acting roles. A few changes were made in between the airing of the special and the move to become a series, aside from dropping the documentary framing. For instance, Larry had children in the special, but they would be dropped when the show went to series.
By the way, I still think that refrigerator helped make the decision about having no kids in the show. Because when we shot in the kitchen, it was like, well, if you have kids, we got to put stuff out in the refrigerator. And Larry said, don't bother, we don't have kids.
Yeah, I think we decided that night,
Yeah, literally, right before we started shooting. Do you have kids or not? We don't need kids.
That's how much thought went into this.
Another thing that was dropped was the enmity between Cheryl and Jeff, and Cheryl specifically had another change. Cheryl Hines explained in an interview. At the beginning of the show, I think the producers were hoping I would be Jewish and that Larry and I would be this Jewish couple. We were in the middle of shooting our first episode when Larry said, "I don't think anybody is going to believe you're Jewish." And I said, "I don't think so either." And he said, "Well, I guess you don't have to be." Cheryl's hair, which had been darkened for the series, got progressively lighter in the first season, reflecting this change in her character. One of the defining features of Curb Your Enthusiasm is Larry David asking why social conventions are what they are.
There is no social contrivance, there is no courtesy, there is no article of daily life that doesn't sort of catch his attention with a quizzical, why?
When humans get together like that, it's fraught with tension.
What was the thing?
Social intercourse is really my second trick.
The first episode of the series, The Pants Tent, explores the minutiae that make social situations fraught. When Larry goes to the movies with Cheryl's friend Nancy, played by Robin Rosen, he gets into a fight with one of the theater goers when he's making his way to his seat. And then Nancy mistakes a fold in Larry's pants for an erection when they're sitting together. This is then coupled with Larry noticing that the woman he just had a rude interaction with in the theater happens to be Richard's new girlfriend, played by Sofia Milos. This is a pretty standard twist on the show. disparate incidents happening at the same time, often overlapping as a series of awkward social encounters. All of this will eventually blow up in Larry's face by the end of the episode. The fun of the series isn't just seeing Larry fall on his face. What makes these minor moments so interesting is that they present real social conundrums that force the audience into wrestling with the very weighty question of who is in the wrong here. And once you map that onto your own life, you're asking the even heavier question of, in this situation, am I the asshole or are they the asshole? Curb Your Enthusiasm is an entire series that embraces that question, and it isn't always Larry who's the asshole. In the pants tent, we see Larry and Richard's new girlfriend both act like jerks when they make Larry's trip to his seat more confrontational than it needed to be. Larry didn't need to bring up her sigh when he said, "Excuse me," to pass through, but is someone expected to take the long way around rather than put out a single person sitting down? Is all of this incredibly low stakes and unimportant? Sure, but it's also the sort of thing we deal with every single day. While other sitcoms might busy themselves with job interviews or first dates or other more obviously weighty social situations, Curb Your Enthusiasm brings us the most basic of social interactions, and then injects into those situations a man who demands the social order explain itself, and for those who then violate the social order, face some kind of public blowback. Another example is a very relatable question that is raised when Larry refuses to give two teenage girls Halloween candy because he thinks they're too old for trick-or-treating, and they also aren't even wearing costumes.
I don't think so.
Are you kidding? It's
No.
Halloween.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it doesn't mean that you're entitled to just go around to people's homes and bilk them out of candy.
After their home is vandalized, Cheryl confronts Larry on his ethos.
You know what? Not everybody knows your rules, Larry. Yeah, you got your own set of rules, and you think everyone's going to adhere to them, but they're not because nobody knows them.
The rules Larry is trying to follow aren't entirely his own. We all know there's some kind of age-based cutoff for trick-or-treating, but how exactly that's measured, or even more importantly, how that's enforced, is entirely up for debate. We have all these rules in our head, so when we see these two people appear at Larry's door, there's a good chance you see them violating those rules too. Maybe to avoid a scene or avoid some future vandalism, you might even give them some candy anyway. By refusing to play along, Larry is assigning himself as the one who decides where the line is, and that he's going to enforce it. In a way, it's heroic, even if it ends up blowing up in his face, and it's part of what people enjoy about Larry. Someone who's not going to let something slide because another person decided they weren't going to play by these unwritten social rules. There are other times when Larry's side is much harder to take, particularly when he uses social conventions to his advantage, such as when his mother passes away and he uses her death to get out of social obligations.
She's holding up two things, which makes me look more grown up, Daddy. And I'm going, okay.
You know, my mother just died.
At one point, he even uses his mother's death for sex.
I didn't even have a chance to say goodbye.
Oh, honey.
This is an important contrast to the times in which we see Larry as a hero, because he's also a complete asshole in other episodes, or more often than not, a mix of both. While deep down you want to believe he's a decent guy, and that might be true, the other side of that is he's also a jerk. And if we're honest with ourselves, we've all been both of these things at various points in our lives too. Alec Berg, an executive producer on Curb Your Enthusiasm who joined the show in 2005, said, "There are two types of Curb stories. There are the ones where Larry is the asshole and he's good at it. He's not the guy that fights for us. He's the guy we want to fight. You know, that fucking asshole. Then there are the stories where Larry goes, 'You're not going to believe the fucking asshole I ran into.' Those are the ones where Larry speaks for all of us. He's a crusader for the rights of the downtrodden. Somebody needs to stand up to the assholes." Maybe it's just the utter gall of the Larry character that makes him so alluring. Many people have hypothesized that the Larry we see on screen is secretly the one we'd like to be sometimes, at least when he's ahead in the story. But considering he fails more often than not, being Larry doesn't always seem like a good idea, and instead he might just be better off as a sounding board for social hypotheticals. Larry David and Cheryl Hines have a very strong chemistry that makes their marriage work on screen. In the season 3 episode Terrorist Attack, there's a moment where Larry and Cheryl have a conversation in which Larry explains how he would eventually be fine if Cheryl died in a terrorist attack.
If you feel good about one of us dying and the other one surviving, and you can live with that for the rest of your life, then you should go golf this weekend.
I'll think about it.
This conversation takes up roughly 2 minutes of the episode and wasn't at all present in the outline.
And so that scene was really improvised out of pretty much nothing. And I couldn't, that scene I could not get through. I was laughing so hard.
Sure.
It took, I was like 15 takes to do that.
Although on-screen chemistry sometimes amounts to a feeling in most sitcoms, in this case the chemistry between these two creates entire conversations that explore the nature of this marriage, and just what it takes for someone to stay married to Larry. This moment is a microcosm of their relationship. Cheryl frustrated by Larry being self-centered while urging him to think of her for a change. In this case, it works. Larry stays behind and faces the terrorist attack that never quite happens. Rather than be a constant martyr, the show hits enough of a balance that sometimes Cheryl comes across as petty in her own way, like when she asks Larry to get them a table at a restaurant using his Seinfeld connection, even though it clearly makes him uncomfortable.
Try the Seinfeld thing and see if she reacts.
Go get out of here. I'm not going to say
Just say that
forget
you
it.
were-
I'm not going to say
No,
that.
it will help. Ma'am?
No, Cheryl, that's
can you think
ridiculous.
for 1 second?
While this might not be a nice thing to do, it's not nearly as off-putting as what Larry usually does to Cheryl. Although sometimes the source of friction between Larry and Cheryl isn't even Larry's fault, such as when Larry is put in charge of an obituary for Cheryl's aunt, and there's a typo.
Devoted sister, beloved cunt? Huh? That's what you put in the paper?
Moments later, Larry is arguably in the wrong, but not entirely to blame, when we find out that Cheryl's sister Becky, played by Caitlin Olsen, was dumped after her boyfriend spoke to Larry at the funeral.
He talked to me at the funeral, but I told him to wait till he got back to Tallahassee. I didn't say to do it last night. It's late.
Well, never mind!
In this scene, Cheryl has to ask Larry to leave the house for the night because everyone is furious with him. But her knowing Larry means she probably understands that there's more to this story than meets the eye. If a marriage is meant to be a partnership where two people walk through life together, Larry and Cheryl feature one partner dragging the other through social awkwardness and humiliation. And when they finally call it quits, we completely empathize with Cheryl.
What do you mean you're leaving? What are you doing?
I just called you from an airplane telling you I was about to crash.
The TiVo guy was here. I could barely hear what you were saying. He was about to leave.
Even in the episode where Cheryl leaves Larry, he's still constantly distracted by the minor details of life, like a restaurant hostess who doesn't believe Larry and Cheryl split.
I need to go, Larry.
Will you call the restaurant?
The rest of these episodes that focus on Larry and Cheryl's divorce are filled with these little problems occupying a lot of Larry's attention. Cheryl leaving is one of the biggest events in Larry's life we've seen on the show so far, and he still seems just as vexed by all these little problems as if she hadn't left him at all. It really highlights how greatly he emphasizes the little things in life, letting them constantly distract him from the bigger things that should matter. It's ironic because the little things in life are typically what are overlooked, but not for Larry. His problem is that he seems to sweat every detail, whether it's big or small, and there's a real lack of scale sometimes. Cheryl leaving Larry is perhaps the most realistic outcome for their marriage. It's hard to imagine anyone putting up with this Larry for very long. Of course, the one person who will always have to put up with it is Larry himself. One change that's noticeable in the early seasons of the series was how it began to adopt season-long arcs. In the first season, that wasn't the case, although by the second, they were introduced via a plotline where Larry was developing a new show with Jason Alexander about a character who had appeared on a hit show and was forever seen in that role. An obvious reference to how everyone saw Alexander as George after the end of Seinfeld.
I tell this to people all the time. You can't imagine what a great actor this guy is. He is nothing like that character.
Thank you.
According to the Curb Your Enthusiasm book, when Jason Alexander's sitcom Bob Patterson was picked up by ABC, he had to drop out of Curb Your Enthusiasm and was replaced by Julia Louis-Dreyfus.
Maybe it would be better suited for somebody like Jason. Listen,
I could
it's
see
kind
you
of a-
being
it's
more
ki-
frustrated than Jason because you know how many different things you can do.
Yeah, that's true.
Really, this is all he can do between you and me.
Yeah, you know, I'm more.
Yeah, you're more versatile. Right.
Although arcs like these would only start in the second season, continuity was always a part of the show. For example, when Larry got into a fight with Richard Lewis in one episode, his finger was still injured in the next. The only real slip-up in the first season was when we saw an unhoused guy mention that Larry gave him some chicken l'orange in the fourth episode of the series.
Hey, you're that chicken l'orange guy, huh?
Oh, yeah.
But we didn't see Larry actually give him the chicken l'orange until the seventh episode.
You want this? What is it? Chicken l'orange?
the show also had a strange relationship with the continuity of the special that preceded it. The special ended with Larry getting out of his stand-up special at HBO when he lies about his stepfather getting into an accident. Although the show liked to pretend parts of the special never happened, like Larry having children, in the second season, Larry mentions it offhand.
It's my stepfather. He got in a car accident and he's in a coma.
Remember 2 years ago, I got out of that special. I told him my stepfather got in an accident.
Larry David was never terribly concerned with the ratings of the series and instead seemed more focused on its quality.
I wanted my friends to like it, most importantly, and I wanted the critics to like it, and I thought, well, if we got that, then we're off to a good start, and that's pretty much what we had. I've never really paid attention to ratings, but I knew it would find an audience at some point, and I suppose it did.
In an interview, Jeff Garlin described the show's status at HBO, saying, "For the first 3 seasons or so, HBO called us their little experimental show. What really seemed to help it find a wider audience was that in its 3rd season, it was scheduled to come on after The Sopranos, one of the most watched shows on HBO at the time. The extra attention helped bring Curb Your Enthusiasm to a wider audience, which led to an increase in its budget and a notable bump in production quality in later seasons. Perhaps one of the biggest indicator of the show's growing profile was in the finale for season 5, titled The End, where Larry seemingly dies after having donated a kidney to Richard Lewis.
You really never should have let me do that Seinfeld TV guide cover. I really looked like an asshole.
He's right, by the way, it was a terrible photo. When Larry goes to the afterlife, we see a very nice set for heaven, and he's guided by Dustin Hoffman and Sacha Baron Cohen.
Mr. Great Guy who let me do that TV guide cover. Fuck you. Came out like, fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you.
Larry is eventually sent back because he's too annoying for heaven. This episode and several others in the later half of the first 5 seasons demonstrate how Curb Your Enthusiasm was getting a bigger budget and was increasing its cultural cachet, attracting big stars, and not just those who were connected to Larry David. In later seasons, the guest stars would start popping up even more frequently, and the production values demonstrated that this was no longer a little experiment, but a very important sitcom to HBO. The season 5 finale was also one of the first to hint around the idea that the series could be ending, in this case having Larry nearly die. The gap between seasons 5 and 6 was also the longest break between seasons so far, reaching nearly 2 years between their respective premieres. It reflected the unorthodox production schedule change for the series, where breaks started getting longer between seasons as Larry David considered whether or not to end the series.
It's a miracle. I swear to you, it's a miracle.
There's one season 4 episode that has an interesting story behind it related to its production. It was titled The Carpool Lane. But first, a little backstory. In August of 2003, a man named Juan Catalan was charged with the murder of a young woman, Martha Puebla. She had testified at a hearing a few days prior in which Juan's brother was one of 2 men charged with 2 murders. Catalan's defense was that he was at a Dodgers game the night of the murder, placing him 20 miles away from the crime scene. Although he was able to produce ticket stubs and had the people he attended the game with testify on his behalf, the prosecution argued that anyone could have used those tickets, and there was no non-biased proof that Catalan had attended the game. Catalan's lawyer managed to get a hold of footage from the stadium to place a man who looked like Catalan at the game, but the footage was too low in its resolution to effectively prove that the man we see in it was Juan Catalan. In the episode The Carpool Lane, Larry hires a prostitute so he can make use of the carpool lane in order to get to a Dodgers game on time. Part of that episode involved filming in Dodger Stadium while a game was being played. It just so happened that this episode was shot at the same game Juan Catalan attended. They even happened to be filming in the section Catalan had been sitting in. Once Catalan's lawyer learned of this fact, he managed to get in touch with the production company and went over the raw footage that was shot. All of it captured at a much higher resolution than the stadium cameras. Not only did they find Catalan in multiple shots, they had one very clear shot of Catalan walking with his daughter right in front of Larry David. The Netflix documentary Long Shot describes the moment Catalan's lawyer found this out while sitting next to David.
I literally jumped out of my chair.
Literally sprung out of his chair.
And there was this gasp.
And there he was. Pretty cool.
Not only did this place Catalan at the game, the time codes show he was well into the run of it. While technically Catalan could have still traveled the 20 miles required to commit the murder at the time it happened, cell phone location records made it clear that he was still at the stadium when he called home before leaving at the end of the game. Later, the cops in charge of the case were found to be dishonestly prosecuting Catalan and reassigned. The real murderers of Martha Puebla were eventually found and pled guilty in exchange for life sentences. It's pretty amazing that a TV show could play a role in keeping a man out of prison for a crime he didn't commit. Check out the Netflix documentary Longshot if you want more details on this story. As a Blue Jays fan, though, I still hate the Dodgers. One of the first jokes we see in the Curb Your Enthusiasm special is Larry expressing a desire to be seen as one of the good ones.
I've never heard of white liberal nodding guilt.
Yeah, it's a way of kind of making contact. Yeah. You know, like I'm okay. I'm not one of the bad ones.
Race is a major preoccupation in the series, or more specifically, the white liberal anxiety Larry has whenever he's around black characters.
It's such a delicate subject in life, and it's never touched upon and never talked about. Race relations. That to be able to do this on the show is fun for me.
A lot of the jokes in the early seasons involve Larry accidentally coming across as racist, and it's often Wanda Sykes who's calling him out on it.
Larry's a tip profiler. Fix the black man's tip.
Well, he didn't leave enough of a tip. What am I supposed to do?
Well, you trying to get an NAACP Image Award or something?
When speaking about the show, Sykes said, "I don't know if all black people like the show, but there are quite a few. I think because the show addresses race. It does it from rich people's point of view, but that's close enough. At least somebody's talking about it." At the beginning of season 6, Larry and Cheryl take in a family with the last name Black, who have been displaced by a recent hurricane, a reference to the disastrous impact of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans in 2005.
So your last name is Black.
Yes.
That's like if my last name was Jew, like Larry Jew.
The Blacks were an interesting addition to the series and allowed for Larry to have a variety of new interactions with different types of characters. Not only were they black, they were also of a lower socioeconomic status and had kids with them. And throughout season 6, it led to some unique storylines, perhaps most notably when, after Larry and Cheryl divorce, Larry ends up dating Loretta Black, played by Vivica A. Fox. And we get a glimpse of Larry living a domestic life with kids and a far more confrontational wife.
You're such a bald asshole. I can't even begin
Who the fuck do you think you talking to? Don't nobody talk to my man like that. You better get your ass out of my house, you fucking bitch.
Goodbye.
Larry living a happy life, of course, could never last, and a few episodes later, in the next season, it all comes crashing down when Larry lets Loretta mistakenly think he was cheating on her so they can safely break up after she receives a cancer diagnosis. Loretta's brother Leon, played by J.B. Smoove, decided to stay with Larry.
I guess this means you'll be going upstairs, eat this fucking Chinese food in my fucking room.
Leon is a strange guy. Unlike Loretta, Auntie Ray, and the kids, he wasn't displaced by the hurricane. He was already living in Los Angeles and decided to move in with Larry when he found out his sister and her family were staying at the David home. Before joining Curb Your Enthusiasm, J.B. Smoove worked as a writer and performer on Saturday Night Live. Smoove had wanted to be a part of Curb for years, though he got a spot on the show purely by chance. He was only in Los Angeles for the day, attending a friend's funeral.
So I literally came in town, my buddy's memorial service that night, that morning, went to my agent, say hi to them before I was leaving town. They said, you know, can you go over to this audition?
They told me after the fact that they didn't know who Leon was until I walked in the room.
The chemistry between Smoove and David was so strong that they just decided Leon would be a permanent part of the show.
Larry and JB before they even start talking, you look at a frame that they're in, it's just funny.
Leon is a difficult character to summarize. He's a lot like Kramer on Seinfeld in that so much of his allure is that he's a singular enigma that is unlike most other members of the cast. J.B. Smoove describes him saying, "Larry never knows who the fuck Leon is. No one does. I tried to give Larry something he didn't know about Leon every time we did a scene, but still left enough mystery so he didn't know where the hell he came from. Did he skip out on the rent at his place? Larry still doesn't know his complete background. He still can't prove if half the stories that Leon tells are true." Larry keeps Leon around because, in spite of the mystery of Leon, he has a strange allure. He gives Larry terrible advice, but he's also there for Larry whenever a scheme needs to be deployed. They're unlikely friends.
If I go up there, I will kill this motherfucker. Michael J. Fox about to be Michael J. fucked up in a minute.
Leon is also the only regular black character on the show, so part of what makes him seem so different is that he's used to being in a part of the world Larry doesn't really have access to. But their friendship suggests that maybe there's a way to bridge that divide. Only the people doing the bridge building in this case happen to be self-centered and prone to getting into huge social dust-ups. Leon became so popular, he even got his own book titled The Book of Leon.
I was a breast baby myself, and that's the best way to go. Canned milk is all right, but it ain't as good as breast milk. Now, why did I say breast milk instead of titty milk, you ask? Because breast milk is for the baby and titty milk is for the daddy, if you're into that kind of thing.
Curb Your Enthusiasm has a number of other characters from different racial backgrounds, such as Dana Lee as Mr. Takahashi. Episodes often touched on some delicate racial subjects, including jokes about Japanese kamikaze pilots and a Korean bookie named Sung, played by Bobby Lee, who's suspected of eating a dog. There was a surprising lack of Hispanic recurring characters on the show, considering it's set in California. Eventually, in its 11th season, Larry's life became entangled with a taco store owner, Marcos, played by Marquez Rey, who wanted to see his daughter, Maria Sofia, played by Kayla Monteroso Mejia, onto a show Larry is developing. Through these interactions, a lot of tricky topics like stereotypes and cultural sensitivities come up, but surprisingly not too much controversy. Curb Your Enthusiasm was a gutsy show, and Larry would often say and do outrageous things, including using the occasional slur. But it was always done in a very specific context that I think gave audiences a bit of leniency towards what he could get away with. Looking back at some of the older shows, you can't help but think that some of these incidents would have played out differently if these episodes were produced in 2025. But I think they provide an interesting historical perspective on where the culture was over 20 years ago with regards to race relations. In the third season, Larry befriends Wanda's fiancé, a rapper named Crazy Eyes Killa, played by Chris Williams. It's a fun episode that won its director, Robert Whitey, an Emmy. The episode includes an awkward moment where Larry, following the lead of Crazy Eyes Killa, uses the N-word to describe himself as Crazy's pal. When this episode aired in 2002, it didn't really cause much of an uproar. Though a few years later, in 2006, there was some controversy when Michael Richards, who had worked with Larry David on Seinfeld, was caught on camera shouting the N-word on stage at some people in the audience who he considered disrespectful. The next year, we got the Curb Your Enthusiasm episode titled The N-Word, where Larry gets in trouble for using that word when recounting a story. The commentary on the Michael Richards incident becomes even more explicit next season when we see a recreation of the whole thing, with Richards making a guest appearance on the show. For some context for this clip, Leon, at Larry's request, was helping trick Michael into thinking his potential medical diagnosis was not such a big deal.
If only there were a horrible name that I could call you that would make you as angry as I am. What? Oh.
Looking at the context of when the show was on the air, it's not that people were less sensitive to if certain words were used, but rather how they were used. Reactions to the Michael Richards footage demonstrated that. It seems that audiences are savvy enough to understand how artistic license creates a slightly wider permission structure. Curb Your Enthusiasm works under the presumption that Larry David, the person and not the character, wouldn't throw around a slur so cavalierly, which seems to be true as evidenced by a conversation he had with Susie Essman following the end of the 6th season.
I couldn't write dialogue that clever, yeah. You know, are you my N-word? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What Crazy Eyes Killa said to me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And of course, this wouldn't be the only time Larry David would broach something so controversial and receive limited or no real pushback against it. Jason Alexander described this, saying, "If the audience understands from an entertainer that the intent of what they're doing is to delight, is to entertain, then the entertainer can get away with an awful lot. But if the intent is to diminish in some way, no matter how cleverly or skillfully done, you feel it. Like if a comedian is trying to make me laugh, I give them a lot of leeway. They can make short jokes, Jew jokes, ball jokes. They can go really far because I don't think they're trying to hurt me. Intention is a difficult thing to communicate, and I think Larry David's comes across more clearly when looking at some other examples of representation. There are a surprising number of disabled people who appear on Curb Your Enthusiasm. Their inclusion makes perfect sense because the show is often about rules and social situations, accommodations for disabled people introduced to able-bodied people, situations that are uncommon but familiar enough for some fun misunderstandings. It also helps that the show is never interested in the more sappy, inspirational stories of overcoming adversity, and simply lets disabled people exist in the series as the same way everyone does, whether they're just average passerbys or complete assholes. These are the people Larry runs into on a daily basis, so why wouldn't some of them be on occasion disabled?
I don't think they want to be treated with kid gloves. I think they want to be treated the way that everybody else is treated. And if he happens to cut in front of my car becomes an argument that you would have if you're in one car and somebody's in another car. You'd just be screaming at each other.
One thing I think shows some good intent on David's behalf is how he actually cast disabled actors for the roles of disabled characters on the show. Christopher Norton, who played Cliff Cobb, a guy who tried to convince Larry that his father invented the Cobb salad, reflected on his time on the show, saying, "You don't find many good parts being an actor in a wheelchair. They don't tend to let actors read for parts that aren't in a wheelchair, and the stuff that is written is usually small and condescending and lame." I remember Larry was aware of the possibility that some people might take offense, but he knew that it was so real and funny it didn't stop him from doing it. Of course, this wasn't always the case, such as when the able-bodied Anita Barone played the character Denise in the episode Denise Handicap, but the series did far better than most others. We see a similar pattern when it comes to trans representation later in the series, with trans actors playing the role of trans characters, including Chaz Bono as Marty Funkhauser's son Joey, and Ian Harvey as Ken, a former lover of Larry's before Ken transitioned. These stories explore the oddness of the situation of Larry feeling like he needs to advise Joey on how to use his unusually large penis, which Joey keeps swinging around recklessly, or the discomfort Larry has when he realizes the person he once hooked up with now identifies as a different gender. In one case, it's Larry trying to be supportive of a friend's son's recent transition, and the other is his own anxiety over being thought gay. In both those cases, there's no real attempt to belittle trans identities, and instead it explores the odd social interactions Larry has with a group of people he doesn't often come into contact with. In the Season 8 episode, The Bisexual, the comedy comes from Larry and Rosie O'Donnell competing over the affections of a bisexual woman.
You pick a side already, right?
Absolutely.
Can't you make up your mind?
What is this? They have to have sex with everyone?
They have to do everything?
Half the population isn't enough for them?
What started off as two friends trying to bond over hating a bisexual person is revealed as a farce as the two instead compete over this woman's affections.
Game on, Larry David.
You got it, sister.
All right. Good luck to you.
You're in over your head, Rosie.
You think so?
I know so.
The character of Larry ultimately isn't really a bigot, and Larry David the person doesn't seem to be one either. That the show is able to communicate those two things, I think, helps people contextualize these moments, particularly since none of them get mean-spirited. Rather, it's an attempt to address complex social interactions other shows would sooner pretend don't exist, or perhaps don't consider worth talking about. From 2025, it's a lot easier to look back at some of these episodes that toss around slurs so casually and be correct that it wouldn't work the same way today. But it's also a reminder that these conversations needed to happen to get to that point as well. And this show often feels like a public conversation about how people feel very uncomfortable and don't know how to act respectfully to groups of people they're not used to being around, something this show is more willing to confront than some of its contemporaries. Not necessarily with the intent to make some kind of bold moral pronouncement, but instead highlight that these are things that are going on in the world, and it's kind of funny because people really don't know how to deal with it. It's an important kind of representation because it feels real. It acknowledges the reality of a world that includes diversity within it, and how we're still trying to figure out how this all works together. Perhaps the most sacred of cows that is frequently addressed by the show is the subject of religion. Larry David does not have a terribly high opinion of it.
If I really believed that stuff, I'd keep it to myself. Let somebody think I was out of my mind.
David was raised Jewish, and the character Larry culturally identifies as such on the show, so that particular religion is given special attention. But there are numerous swipes at Christianity, Islam, and any other religious tradition that manages to present itself. Religion was one of the few topics that did generate some public backlash. David explains in an interview saying,
"We got some blowback on the show where I inadvertently peed on the Christ painting." Yeah.
One of the more interesting episodes about religion is the season 5 finale, The End, where we see the culmination of a season-long arc where Larry tries to figure out if he's adopted. He learns that his real parents aren't actually Jewish, but instead Christian, and his entire personality changes.
I can't be sitting here. If something happens, we won't be able to get out.
Calm down, okay?
I cannot do it. I will panic. We will go down.
Oh, hi there.
Hi. I'll go ahead and get you another seat, okay?
Oh, won't hear of it. You can depend on me, ma'am. I won't let you down.
Larry's newfound attitude leads him to happily donate his kidney to Richard Lewis, but he immediately changes his tune when he finds out that he wasn't adopted after all.
I can't do it! I'm not adopted!
The great thing about this episode is how it demonstrates that a person's religious identity is not some biological trait, but rather a product of their psychology. At no point was Larry not who he always thought he was, but when faced with a convincing enough alternative, he changes his entire personality. It speaks keenly to how the show views religion in general, not as some inherent trait, but rather something absorbed and reflected socially, at least when it comes to Larry and his understanding of how the upbringing of his religion has shaped him, the sort of thing even someone as non-religious as him took for granted. David Mandel, who wrote for the show's 8th season, said, "It's full of heavy issues that comedy generally wants to run from, but it's funny because Larry never punches down. He'll have strange conversations, perhaps with a deaf person or somebody who is transgender, but the jokes are never belittling to the person he's interacting with. They're never attacking that person. The comedy is coming from somewhere else." His comments and questions from a genuine curiosity, which I think is also very true of Larry David the person. The whole idea of finding some kind of humor or levity in these weighty topics, I think serves as a kind of refuge where we can explore ideas and not always be mired in their heaviness. To not let that weight define everything that happens and give us just a bit of levity to ease some of the tension. Ultimately, this is why I think these shows don't get quite the same blowback as other programs out there. Because when it comes to how they're being shaped, they come from a genuine place of curiosity and exploration, not to give some definitive moral take on any of these subjects, but to provide a kind of relief. People, of course, still do take offense to some of the stories, but the intent to make something funny while incidentally being offensive, rather than being offensive in an attempt to be funny, separates Curb Your Enthusiasm from other less well-received shows. After the Curb Your Enthusiasm special aired, there was a review for it in Variety that included an interesting paragraph towards its end. David's self-absorption, and why shouldn't it be there, it is his show, is 100% Seinfeld. In his routine, there's an aura of Jerry. In his personal mishigas, we see Jerry dealing with a world in disarray. When David bombs on stage, he blames it on what happens when you run out of nothing, a definite ode to Jerry. It raises an interesting topic, not so much how much of the Jerry Seinfeld character was influenced by Larry David, because no doubt some of it was, but how the series Seinfeld would constantly be associated with Curb Your Enthusiasm. Curb's original marketing definitely highlighted this connection it had to Larry David's past with Seinfeld.
At 9:30, the new HBO series by the co-creator of Seinfeld, Curb Your Enthusiasm.
And in case you missed the commercials, the references and guest appearances reminded you of that Seinfeld connection.
You ever seen the Seinfeld show?
Yeah?
I'm the co-creator of the show.
In this fictionalized version of the real world, it would be strange for no one to mention the fact that Larry created one of the most popular sitcoms of all time, but it's often more trouble than it's worth. We spend less time with Larry being lavished with awards and kudos, and more on annoying fans and annoying former coworkers. We see just how little creating a hit show gets you in social capital. The success of the show brings with it a lot of annoyances. Curb's relationship with Seinfeld was most deeply embraced in the 7th season Seinfeld storyline, an unexpected twist on reviving the old series.
We never would have done a normal reunion show. It never would have happened. This is the
It would have
only
looked
way.
like this, actually, if we had.
Yeah.
And you can see how this is going.
In an interview about the season, Larry David said, "We're always looking for a great story arc, and they're not that easy to come up with. They're more in the vein of a movie premise. That's how the Seinfeld reunion came about. We knew it was something we could have fun with, and we had no other ideas at the time." Larry decided to revive Seinfeld because he's trying to win Cheryl back after their divorce, offering her a role in the new Seinfeld show, hoping it will rekindle the romance as they work together. Not only did the cast from Seinfeld return, but so did many of the supporting actors, crew members, and other people who were involved with creating the show.
I wanted the people who were there at on regular read-throughs when the show was on the air. So we invited a lot of the writers, we invited PAs and producers, people who worked there.
The Seinfeld sets were reconstructed, modernized slightly so it would appear as though Jerry's apartment hadn't changed too much in 10 years, but he had certainly done some things to refresh it. Part of the hype around this season is, in part, because of how Seinfeld ended.
You know, we joke about it at the show, but I haven't met many people that were satisfied by our finale.
I think real fans of the show will go, that's what I really wanted the finale to be, like this.
The 7th season of Curb fully embraced its connection to Seinfeld, that, I think, ironically helped the show move away from it. In the seasons that followed this one, Seinfeld references, while never going away entirely, became less common. I don't think the show was trying to run from that legacy, but it did feel like it had more of itself to build on and expand. There's a hint of that in the 7th season. Even though a lot of attention is placed on the Seinfeld storyline, this is also the season where Larry splits with Loretta, and there are a few standalone episodes that only briefly mention the season-long arc. It showed how Curb Your Enthusiasm was very much its own show. In fact, when looking at the Seinfeld cast, Michael Richards and Jason Alexander only appeared in 3 episodes in the 7th season. Julia Louis-Dreyfus was in 4, and Jerry Seinfeld appeared in 5. And of the 4 of those actors, only Jerry Seinfeld would appear in any future episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm. Even the season's finale, titled Seinfeld, probably had a more lasting impact on Curb Your Enthusiasm because it introduced Mocha Joe, played by Severio Guerra, who would be a major antagonist for Larry in the future.
Those dogs are gonna get put down.
That's right, Larry. Those dogs are getting gassed. I'd do it myself if I could, and I'd have it televised.
Another fun part of the season was Larry, the character from Curb Your Enthusiasm, acting like George from Seinfeld, who Jason Alexander has said is an impression of the actual Larry David. It's a very bizarre scene.
It's a little strange telling the guy that came up with George how to do George.
No! 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 Ho ho! George is getting upset!
Larry David being a real-life George Costanza, or perhaps vice versa, was a kind of comparison people liked to make. But I think this moment makes it clear that Larry and George are not the same characters, and while Jason Alexander might have been doing a Larry David impression, that doesn't mean he was a copy of the man. And the Larry we see on the show certainly isn't a copy of the real Larry David either. Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm are 2 shows often discussed together, but they're very different. Had the Seinfeld reunion been done earlier in the series, it might have seemed like a desperate attempt by a new show to borrow on the legacy of its creator's old glory. If it had been done later into the series, it might have seemed unnecessary, as Curb was enough of its own hit to work without that connection. But having it in season 7, right at the show's halfway point, feels like a nice compromise where it can acknowledge the past without feeling indebted to it. The gap between season 8 and 9 of Curb Your Enthusiasm was unusually long. It was over 6 years between the end of season 8 on September 11th, 2011, and the premiere for season 9 on October 1st, 2017. In between that time, Larry David wrote and then appeared on stage in the Broadway play Fish in the Dark. Although David would perform as the character Norman Drexel when the play opened, he would eventually be replaced by Jason Alexander a few months into its run. The play was a big financial hit, but David was not entirely comfortable performing on stage. In an interview, he described it saying, "It was an experience, much like the Army, but I didn't re-up for that, and I'm not going to re-up for this." Reviews for Fish in the Dark describe it as very similar in tone to Curb Your Enthusiasm, which shouldn't be surprising since Larry David wrote it. And if audiences were hungry for that, they would be getting more on their television in the show's 9th season.
I just wanted to do it again. People kept asking me. I thought, yeah, I suppose I should do this.
It's highly unusual for a successful show to take so much time off, though Curb seemed to have a special relationship with HBO, free to take as much time as was needed between episodes. They were even given extra time in season 9 for their episodes.
HBO took the time limit off the show. Some shows, like I think show 6, will go 40 minutes because it just is funny for 40 minutes.
The gap between the seasons didn't undercut the prestige of the series either, as it still drew in guest stars, including Bryan Cranston and Elizabeth Banks.
A gust of wind came. It blew a rake off of the
roof! Off the roof of the house onto the car.
I was handling it.
The 9th season's arc featured Larry having a fatwa put on him after he insulted the Ayatollah on television. It's a relatively old reference, this one being the fatwa put on Salman Rushdie more than 20 years prior. Though there's a helpful reminder of when the season came out because Larry collaborates with Lin-Manuel Miranda, hot off the success of Hamilton. It really demonstrates how Curb Your Enthusiasm reflects culture in a unique way, surely because the show is run for so long. We can go back to its 3rd season where we get a feel of the post-9/11 paranoia that gripped America when Larry and his friends are panicked by a rumor of a terrorist attack in Los Angeles.
I'm actually surprised you're here, because, there's a terrorist attack that is going to take out the entire city of Los Angeles.
Sometime this weekend.
In season 10, Larry begins to don a MAGA hat to get himself out of social situations.
It's really coming in handy.
Yeah, because no one's going to want to be anywhere near you.
Exactly. It's a great people repellent.
And the final season satirized the Georgia law that prevented someone from handing out water to people waiting in line to vote.
That's barbaric. What kind of law? Are you serious?
I'm dead serious. You're coming with me.
You can't do... Oh, no, you're making a big mistake.
Robert Whitey said in an interview, "We weren't truth seekers. That was never the intent. You just look at the world around you, observe it, then put it through the comedy meat grinder and something funny comes out the other side." Larry David doesn't speak too much about his personal politics, though a recent op-ed he wrote about Bill Maher having a dinner with Donald Trump, comparing it to himself having a dinner with Hitler, I think makes it clear where he stands. but the show itself isn't quite as aggressive as that piece of writing, even if the show does seem to subtly suggest an opinion.
Come for Shabbos dinner one of these weekends. We had Barry Weiss last Friday night. She's fantastic.
Larry David personally never faced any massive public pushback. He said in an interview, "Yeah, it never did happen that I was canceled. I was kind of hoping it would. That seemed like something I would have liked, especially for comedy. Not for anything else, but for comedy, yeah, that would have been great." I think the fearlessness is part of the appeal of his work. Janet Ashikaga, who worked as an editor on Seinfeld, described it in an interesting way.
I said to him one time, "Is there anything that you wouldn't write about?" And he said, "Well, like what?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know, like pedophilia." And he said, "Well, I wouldn't write about it, but if it came up in the writing, I wouldn't run away from it."
Another unique part of Curb Your Enthusiasm's lengthy stay on the air is it allows us to see all these characters and the actors who play them age considerably. Larry has aged remarkably well considering the timescale involved. You might even say he looks
pretty, 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 pretty cute.
Of course, if you're someone who needs to get a better look at him to see if he's aging or not, here's a chance to look closer. Okay, that should be all of them. If you were wondering where these two running gags came from, Larry David explained pretty good in an interview. That line, pretty, 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 pretty good, came from a bit I did on stage once that had to do with how you never tell your parents how you really feel. It was about my mother coming home and finding me with my head in the oven. She says, "How are things going?" And I say, "Things are good. Things are good. Pretty, 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 pretty good." As for the stare, it doesn't really have a special origin outside of the show. Larry David did it in one episode, and it just stuck around. In addition to looking a little different, Larry does seem to get increasingly cruel in later episodes. For instance, randomly destroying someone's selfie stick.
What?
Ooh, there you go.
Or roughing up someone spraying perfume.
Enigma?
Or pulling a knife on his cousin Andy, played by Richard Kind.
Shut the fuck up! I told you I'm gonna do it! Okay.
It might just be that these happen to be the episodes I watched most recently, but it does create the impression that Larry is developing a harder edge in these later seasons, or perhaps he cares less about social niceties as he ages. While all the actors age throughout the series, the most noticeable perhaps is Richard Lewis. By the 10th season, it was clear that the years were starting to add up for him.
John's starring in a movie.
Well, what
and
else
the
is
character's based on me, so he's kind of shadowing me.
What's the name of the movie? The biggest asshole that ever roamed the earth?
As you could tell, though, his mind for comedy was still pretty sharp. It is a bit difficult to watch the series knowing that Richard Lewis's health was on the decline. The last season in particular is a challenge as Lewis had passed away before its premiere, so it's hard not to think about that while he's on screen. One of the more difficult parts for a long-running show is that, on occasion, a cast member or member of the crew may pass away during production. When a show runs for 25 years, it's almost a certainty. In addition to Richard Lewis, series regulars Bob Einstein, who played Marty Funkhauser, and Shelley Berman, who played Larry's father, Nat, both passed away while the show was still running. I think a video about Curb Your Enthusiasm would be a bit ill-fitting to get too sentimental about these passings, but I do think it's still important to acknowledge them. One thing I haven't touched on is how Larry's wealth makes normal experiences awkward for him, such as trying to ride the bus.
Hey, you know what? You bus people are starting to get on my nerves, okay?
That's it. Get the fuck off.
On the other hand, we also see him react oddly in situations that are completely detached from the average person's experience, such as the episode where he needs to collect the weights of his friends so he can tell the pilot of a private jet how heavy they'll be when they're taking their flight.
I need the weight before we can leave.
That's not happening. Okay, sorry. Get it.
No, I'm afraid it is happening. I have the weight.
Part of what makes the series work is that Larry is miserable, and seeing a wealthy guy not being able to use that money to free himself from the little annoyances of life is funny. While this invites a reading about how class is depicted on the series, it reads to me more as something unique to Larry David, that he sees humiliation, specifically his own, as particularly funny. And this is something that has remained constant throughout his life at various stages of his career. When he tells stories about the first laughs he got, It happened to be in college when he was regaling his friends with all the misadventures of his dating life. The fact that Larry the character and Larry David the person both include heavy doses of themselves as figures for mockery really invites the question as just to how close the Larry character is to Larry David the person, a question that has dogged this series through its entire run. Larry David is a relatively private guy, and most of his answers about his similarity to the version we see on Curb Your Enthusiasm tend to lead to variations of the same joke, that the version of Larry we see on Curb is a more honest version that he wishes he could be.
I am so completely full of shit 24 hours a day. Yeah. Not an honest word ever escapes my lips. Everything is a lie. And so when I do this character, I can't tell you what a pleasure it is for me to do it. That's the guy that I wish I was. Because I got to tell you something. I love that guy.
In other interviews, he's also mentioned how he's begun to act more like TV Larry in his real life.
I'm becoming a little more TV Larry in my life. I got to tell you, it's a pleasure. Somebody asked me out to lunch the other day. I looked at them, I said, no, I don't think so.
So if we can't get a straight answer out of Larry David, we have to go to the people who know him personally. One thing you constantly hear is how, in real life, Larry David is a very generous guy and deeply considerate of people's feelings.
But generally, Larry gets very sensitive. If in character on the show he says something insulting about another character, he's always afraid about how the actor playing that character, if their feelings will be hurt.
Yeah,
He's a much kinder man than people would guess, isn't he?
That's true.
Larry also feels very uncomfortable when people talk about him this way. Here's a good example.
And Larry pulls me aside and he said, how's your nephew?
I said that.
And I said, he's much better. And you said, how's your family? And I said, they're doing fine. And he said, how are you doing? And I said, I'm fine. And he goes, are we good?
And here's a great story from Bob Einstein highlighting just who Larry David is behind the scenes.
Called me up 2 years ago. He said, you want to know what happens in the first episode this year? I said, yeah. He said, your mother dies. I said, unfortunately, it's the truth. She just did die. He said, I'm not changing the script.
In season 10, there's an episode where John Hamm has to shadow Larry because he's playing a character based off of Larry in a movie. It provides an interesting look at an actor trying to capture the character of TV Larry. And it turns out John Hamm is pretty good at it.
And I feel like you've gone way over your appetizer allotment at this point.
My allotment?
Well, there's 3 of us. We each get a third.
Who makes up that fucking rule?
It's an unwritten rule.
In an interview, John Hamm described Larry David saying, "What I think real Larry has over fake Larry is an appreciation of people and life. He's not a misanthrope. He's engaged in life. He just finds certain things interesting and funny and has no compunction about sharing his opinion on this. That's where the similarity exists. But the negative aspect of that attention to detail is certainly played up for laughs. Anybody who spent time with Larry can tell you he's a joy to be around." I think that and other answers reveal the truth of who Larry is something only the people who really know him will ever learn, and it's all contingent with how much of himself he chooses to share. And when it comes to the public, that isn't very much. In the Curb Your Enthusiasm book by Deirdre Dolan, the author offers a good answer as to why this question of the real Larry David weighs so heavily in the minds of the audience. People ask if Larry David is really like that because they want the answer to be yes. They might not have the spine to tell their friend's wife she's being lame, or get in a fight with a trick-or-treater, or go at it with a 9-year-old, but watching David do it every night is irresistible wish fulfillment and the next best thing. What people see in the character of Larry is someone we desperately want to exist, not just for ourselves, but for the sake of a society that often follows conventions without thinking about them. It's ultimately not going to start any revolutions or result in massive changes to the lives of the people in your community, but if we can get someone to stop resting their leg by sticking it out into the aisle of an airplane, by telling them they're acting like a jerk, I think we'll have made society just a touch bit nicer. But the only way to do that without risking to ourselves an awkward social situation would require us to have a real-life Larry to call them out on the bullcrap when they try to violate the rules. The lead-up to the finale followed the season-long arc where Larry violated the Georgia law against handing people water while waiting in line to vote, one of several references to modern politics that the show made in its 12th season.
It's Giuliani! No wonder I thought he looked like an asshole!
Larry's case continued to heat up and eventually led to a trial in the finale titled No Lessons Learned, which aired on April 7th, 2024. The episode is very reminiscent of the Seinfeld finale, particularly as it brought back numerous guest stars who had appeared on the show over its 12 seasons. On the similarity to the Seinfeld finale, Larry David said in an interview,
You didn't like the first one? Who cares? Fuck you, we're doing it again.
the finale to Seinfeld came up frequently on Curb Your Enthusiasm, the running joke being that only Larry seemed to like it.
It could make up for the finale, that's for sure.
I don't know. What does that mean, make up for the finale? There's nothing to make up for.
Larry, we already screwed up one finale. We can't do another.
We didn't screw up a finale. That was a good finale.
Yeah.
But you did the finale, right?
Yeah, Ted, I did the finale.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Jeff Schaffer, a writer and director on Curb Your Enthusiasm, said, when people realized we were redoing the Seinfeld series finale, they were thinking, I can't fucking believe you're going there. And that was the point, to steer the Titanic right back at the iceberg. That made the finale bigger than Curb. It was about Larry's consistent and brilliant intransigence, but the story was so strong that it sort of forced the show's hand to end. The Curb finale came very close to being an exact copy of the Seinfeld finale, with Larry being found guilty and, upon finding himself in his cell, repeating the same conversation Larry had with Cheryl from the first scene in the first episode. In a fun twist, we find out that one of the jurors broke sequestration after Jerry spotted him at a restaurant, and that gets the whole trial tossed out, freeing Larry.
You don't want to end up like this. Nobody wants to see it. Trust me.
And the series ends with Larry and his friends fighting on board a flight back home to California. This ending was actually something they came up with while filming the finale.
The scene we shot with me and Larry in the jail cell was after 11, pushing midnight that night. We were all wiped out. And we hit on that idea, me, Larry, and Schaefer, who was the director. And we hit on, why don't we do a bit about the Seinfeld finale, how this is what we should have done. And the three of us looked at each other like we had just tripped over bar gold.
If there is any kind of conclusion to the series to be found here, it's that Larry is kind of a jerk who was only ever out for himself, and if he did anything good, it was by accident. As a show, it's remarkably resistant to a deeper reading than that. Not that it can't be read critically, but rather it doesn't have any internal message of its own. Maybe it's best explained by Alec Berg, a producer on the show, who said, a sitcom episode went like this. Somebody does something underhanded or selfish, and then in the end, they apologize and fix what they did. In Curb, the characters would act in petty and self-serving ways, screw somebody over, get somebody arrested, lie and shirk responsibility. Then when they were caught, they would lie or double down on reprehensible behavior until they were just so cornered that they were exposed as a piece of shit. And that was the end of the episode. There was no moment where they went, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. The lack of morality is what governed all of Curb. Curb just felt like a much more honest way to do things. I mean, you go your whole life without learning anything. Why do you have to learn something in 22 minutes? That's probably the reason why the final episode's title is No Lessons Learned. If the Seinfeld finale suggested there might be some kind of final justice for people who are so antisocial, Curb Your Enthusiasm's ending suggested the opposite, that maybe guys like Larry are going to be just fine. And since we, as the audience, like him, I guess that's okay. It's the sort of thing that, when you think about it, is a little alarming. And perhaps maybe the lesson here is that Seinfeld finale wasn't quite as bad as people thought it was. Either way, it feels like Larry David has set up a situation where he can't lose. Following the end of the show, and with the promise that this really was the final season, Larry David issued a statement. As Curb comes to an end, I will now have the opportunity to finally shed this Larry David persona and become the person God intended me to be. The thoughtful, kind, caring, considerate human being I was until I got derailed by portraying this malignant character. And so, Larry David, I bid you farewell. Your misanthropy will not be missed. And for those of you who would like to get in touch with me, you can reach me at Doctors Without Borders. It's difficult to put into words just what the legacy of this show is. It certainly ran long enough that it feels like a classic series, even though it only ended in 2024, and it remained at a high quality level throughout its run. Because of the long breaks in its past, there is some speculation that the show will return. Jeff Schaffer described what it's like being behind the scenes, saying, a new season usually starts at the end of the season before it, when Larry says, Curb is finished. There will never be more Curb. Curb is done. Dead. Stick a fork in it. A few months later, he calls and says, I'm not doing another season. We go, okay. Then he says, I only have one idea. Do you want to talk about it? We ask. No, he says, it's a waste of time. Then we'll talk about it. We'll end up working on something that Larry is convinced will never, ever see the light of day. We figure out a season arc, and that's when it's clear that a new season is actually happening. Every comment about a potential 13th season has been more or less answered with a resounding no, so it seems like this may very well be it for the series, but considering its history, it's hard to say that with any definitive certainty. Looking back on Curb Your Enthusiasm, it's helped make Larry David a recognizable face in American comedy as opposed to someone behind the scenes. Typically, this higher public profile leads to appearing all over the places in movies and TV shows, but Larry David has been a lot more selective, and he ends up popping up in very strange places, like him doing a guest spot on Hannah Montana alongside his daughters. He's also appeared as Bernie Sanders on Saturday Night Live, and he was in a COVID PSA for the state of California. Not all of Larry David's appearances were good ones, though, such as his ill-advised decision to star in a commercial for FTX, a cryptocurrency exchange that collapsed amidst accusations of fraud. In David's case, he at least seems aware that he screwed up.
You know, I asked people, friends of mine who were well-versed in this stuff, should I do this ad? Is there anything wrong with this, me doing this? Is this okay? And they said, yeah, this is totally on the up and up. Yeah, it's fine, do it. So, like an idiot, I did it, but yeah.
It's at this point in these videos that I usually describe what happened to the cast after the end of the show, but since it's been less than 2 years, there's not much to report about their professional lives. A documentary directed by Larry Charles, who had long worked with Larry David on Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm, was supposed to air on HBO that looked deeply into the life of Larry David and profiled who he was as a person, effectively answering that question I raised earlier about who is Larry the character and who is Larry David the actual person. The day before it was supposed to air, Larry David intervened so it wouldn't see the light of day. It still exists on a hard drive in Charles's possession, so we might see it one day, but for now that documentary, and perhaps more of Larry David's personal life, remain a mystery. Curb Your Enthusiasm leaves behind it a legacy of a sitcom that always played by its own rules. Alec Berg, in an interview, said, Larry didn't have to work a day after Seinfeld was done, yet he chose to. And that's what I love about Curb. It truly is an offering to the gods. He didn't do it for a paycheck. He didn't do it because somebody ordered it and he had an obligation. He designed it outside of the system. It's obligation-free comedy.
It was the most fun I could ever have possibly had doing anything.
Personally, I hope Larry David doesn't make a 13th season because it would make this entire video an out-of-date mess. Although if that does happen, I know the perfect song that will capture just how I feel. I forget how old I was when I started watching Curb Your Enthusiasm, but it was certainly during the airing of its first 3 or 4 seasons. And I remember thinking it was so different compared to all the other shows I had watched at the time, particularly from the sitcoms I had seen from the 80s and 90s, either when they first aired or through reruns when I was a small child. Finally watching the later seasons for the purpose of making this video was a real treat, and it was nice to see that the series had held up in quality over the years. While I hope he doesn't make any more seasons of Curb Your Enthusiasm, I do hope Larry David does something creative in the future because he's a unique voice in comedy and I think it's a little more fun to have his stuff out in the world. Hopefully he'll do more in the future. If you'd like to see me doing more in the future, consider becoming a patron or channel member for a measly $5 a month. You'll get your name in the credits, advance access to videos, and lots of other fun bonuses I throw in every now and again. If you'd like to support this channel in a non-monetary fashion, you would like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and share this video on social media. Thank you all so much for watching.